Hi everybody, it's Peter Schiff. This is Tuesday, September 1st, 2009. Well, we had about 185 point sell-off in the Dow Jones today. The most interesting thing about the sell-off, I think, was that, of course, the financials were among the weakest. Also, bonds didn't rally. Treasuries were relatively flat on the day. They tried to sell off gold early on, but gold actually finished near the high of the day, up about $5 based on the GLD trading in New York. The dollar was stronger, but it wasn't that significant a rally. And of course, the dollar was right on the low end of its trading range, so it got a small bounce. And again, this leads me to believe that if we are on the cusp of another major leg down in the U.S. stock market, that U.S. stocks will be weaker than foreign stocks, and we will not have a big rise in the value of the dollar or a big drop in commodity prices similar to what happened in the 2008 decline. You know, President Obama was on television today, taking credit for the improvement in the economy based on some industrial production numbers that came out earlier this morning showing a boost in factory output. Also, there were some numbers on home sales that he's claiming credit for the economic recovery. Of course, the reason that consumers are buying more cars and more houses is because the government is giving them the money. We're simply repeating the mistakes that inflated the last bubble, only we're doing it more with government money rather than private money. Remember, we got into trouble with Americans buying too many cars, buying more cars than they can afford. That was made possible by 0% financing that, of course, was courtesy of Alan Greenspan's low interest rates. But also Wall Street, there was a huge market for structured products because of all the speculation that the Fed was encouraging. So Wall Street needed debt to structure, to securitize. So there was a lot of demand for auto loans. So the lending standards collapsed in the automobile industry. And of course, a lot of these auto loans went bad, which is why GMAC went bankrupt and why the government had to take them over. But also why the Federal Reserve is now buying up debt backed by bad auto loans. But what's happening now is the private sector no longer wants to buy this auto debt, but the government is doing it. And now the government is making it worse because it's not simply 0% or 0% financing, it's nothing down. It's $4,500 in cash for clunkers. So the government is actually trying to blow up a bigger auto bubble now by getting people to buy cars with government money. And of course, we get a short-term boost as they go and they buy these cars and the automobile companies get to produce a few more cars. But what are the long-term consequences? Remember, we take people now who had no auto loans, who now have a car payment. People who had no car payments now have to pay $200 or $300 a month for the next 5 or 6 years for a car. What are they going to give up? What are they not going to buy because they have to make those car payments? The same thing with housing. We have the government now encouraging 0% down home buying. We have the tax credit, $8,000 tax credit, which you can take over to FHA and use that for the 100% of the 3% down to buy a home. And of course, Fannie and Freddie now are 100% owned and operated by the U.S. government. They're not simply government agencies anymore or sponsored entities. So what we have is, even though the private sector is learning from its bad mistakes of loaning too much money, the government is just picking up the slack. The government is saying, well, if the private sector doesn't want to make these stupid loans anymore, we'll do it. And so we are buying a little bit of time, and we're getting this bounce because we're able to get Americans to buy more stuff with loans engineered and credit coming directly from the government as opposed to the private sector. But this is going to blow up just like the last bubble. And of course, the government is paying for all this with debt. We're borrowing money from the rest of the world, and of course, some of the money is being printed by the Federal Reserve. But this is not going to build a lasting economic recovery. If we take a look at what just happened over the weekend in Japan and look at the significance potentially of that election, this is really the most substantial change in leadership, or really the only change in leadership in Japan since the end of the Second World War. And if you look at the Democratic Party of Japan, which replaced the LDP, they're very populist. If you look at some of the rhetoric and the things that they're talking about, they're very Japan focused. Japan first. Let's take care of Japan. And one of the policies that might go would be the policy of propping up the dollar, of maintaining 0% interest rates and aggressively intervening and stockpiling U.S. dollars to maintain the status quo, the export market into the United States. Certainly this is not doing the Japanese any good. I think one of the reasons that the Japanese economy has been almost in this progressive state of recession is because of the interference in the Japanese economy by the government, by the BOJ, to artificially prop up their exporters to an American market that really can't afford it. And this giant subsidy for the U.S. economy is one of the reasons that the Japanese economy has been having these problems. And so I think that this new regime may look to change this 0% interest rates, may look to stop subsidizing the U.S. dollar and concentrate more on the domestic economy and trying to make life better for the average Japanese citizen and not the average American. And what that means is the government's effort to get Americans to continue to spend, to continue to buy cars they can't afford and houses they can't afford. We're not going to be able to borrow that money. We're not going to be able to borrow it from Japan or from China or from the rest of the world. The only source of purchasing power or spending is going to be Ben Bernanke and his printing press. And as I've said many, many times, that is the real economic disaster that we are in the process of creating. Rather than trying to praise Bernanke and praise President Obama for their policies that have brought us back from the brink and that have created this new recovery, we should be criticizing them for the complete economic collapse, for the inflationary depression that their policies are ultimately laying the groundwork for. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm off to do a hit on CNBC. Take care, everybody.